And yet another smooth entrance into Nightlight. So, hello and welcome, everybody. I hope we're on the air, right, Deb?
You are.
Okay. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we all call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone. We have as a guest tonight a very special author that I have had the privilege of interviewing a number of times. I always learn from him, and he always challenges me to stretch and learn even further. He's going to guide us through two of his books, the mysteries that are hidden within them, and he's going to tantalize us with a little bit of excerpts from those that are yet to come. He's written two books that I have enjoyed and read, and one of them I've reread a couple of times. His first book was The Royal Arch of Enoch, and that was the impact of Masonic ritual philosophy and symbolism. It was a fascinating book on documents and undiscovered historical anomaly, and how a high-degree Masonic ritual developed in France in the mid-1700s included elements of the Book of Enoch, which was considered lost until Freemason and traveler James Bruce returned to Europe with copies of it from Ethiopia in 1773. The book that I have swallowed a number of times is Cinema Symbolism, and it's a guide to esoteric imagery in popular movies, and it answers questions that are just amazing. It's about the occult, numerological, astrological, mythological, alchemical, tarot, and Kabbalistic iconography. It's an amazing book. He's written, I understand, he's either working on or has finished Symbolism 2, and that covers even more movies, and a novel that is fascinating as well, and quite possibly a third book. It would be a second one on Masonry entitled Freemasonry and the Path to Babylon. Not sure about that one, but he's changed the way that I look at movies tremendously. He's made me more and more aware of how there are subtleties that affect us on a subconscious level that we don't even realize are there. And people who do movies and write books are very well aware of the impact that these archetypes that they weave into their stories trigger within us a memory and an understanding of where the story's going. And it really did improve the way I looked at movies, took away some of the fun here and there, but it did change the way I look at movies forever. Welcome to the show, Robert.
Hi, Barbara. How are you doing? It's great to be back. It's great to be back on the radio, and it's certainly great to be back on Nightlight with you. Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for that tremendous introduction. It's wonderful to be back. I've been on a bit of a radio hiatus, and we can certainly talk about that. I know we were talking about it briefly yesterday, but thank you so much for having me on your show. It's always a pleasure.
Well, you always bring new insight into a lot of different aspects of the world of entertainment, and not every movie falls into the same categories, but some of the major ones that I have enjoyed through time and happily, as I was reading your book, it was like, I saw that one, and it was kind of like, wait a minute, there is another level of insight, of information, of wisdom that is in the movies that absolutely makes the experience so much richer knowing that they're there. So my question is, how did you get to this point in time where you were recognizing these archetypes and dug into them?
Right, sure. It was really, for me, when I was really doing Royal Arch of Enoch, which was my first book, just really uncovering a lot of I guess it really goes back to when I sort of joined the Masonic Lodge, which has now been 20 years. It's hard to believe. But when you go through that process, you're kind of, at least for me at any rate, you're kind of taught to look at the world symbolically. And symbols are very important within Freemasonry. So when I was writing Royal Arch of Enoch and applying all this knowledge that, you get in the lodge, but then you read the works of people like Manly P. Hall, Albert Pike, Albert Mackey, it definitely sort of trains your mind to look for this and, look for it not only, but look for it in the correct contextual meaning. And really, when I was doing Royal Arch of Enoch and when I was writing it, applying symbolism is critical. I mean, it's really what the whole book is about, for lack of a better word. And as I was, writing Royal Arch, and I would say this started probably around the mid 2000s, probably somewhere around 2004, 2005, 2006, somewhere in that time frame. I started noticing this same sort of iconography, the same sort of symbolism, not necessarily Masonic per se, but just, what you mentioned at the top of the hour, dealing with archetypes and the occult and astrology and numerology and hidden meanings in movies, in popular films. And, when you start doing a modicum of research into this, for example, like with the Star Wars movies, 4, 5, and 6, George Lucas has said numerous times that these were based in part on the Joseph Campbell monomyth, which is really critical to understanding, a lot of, the hero's journey. This really turns up a lot in movies, and just doing that. And when I was writing, when I was writing Royal Arch, the last chapter has to do with Masonic symbolism in movies, very hidden themes in movies. We did National Treasure. That's the actual Masonic ritual of the Royal Arch of Enoch on screen, and Excalibur, which is a solar allegory. And then I was able to I still wanted to talk about the subject, so that became my second book. My first book on movie symbolism, which was Cinema Symbolism, my actual second book, where I really broke down a lot of this in with the Matrix and the Gnostic religion that's encoded therein, a lot of Neoplatonic imagery in The Exorcist, things of that nature. And Cinema Symbolism came out originally in the summer of 2014. And then I started writing Cinema Symbolism 2, which was sort of more movies that I wanted to talk about, which, had this these hidden symbols, these hidden themes in them. But of course, Cinema Symbolism couldn't go on forever. So as I'm sitting here speaking with you tonight, Cinema Symbolism 2 is actually complete. It should be the print editions of this should be out in about 2 weeks or so. So yeah, Cinema Symbolism 2 is done. I've seen the completed work. It's coming in, give or take, at around 680 pages. So it's another Royal Arch of Enoch length. Again, this does include, things like the index and the bibliography and things like that. But it is very long. It covers, a brand new slate of movies that were talked about in Cinema Symbolism. And again, the print copy of this should be on the streets probably in about 2 weeks, I should say.
Oh, fantastic. Because I did look, my sister, who is into shamanism, saw the write-up for the show, and she said, oh, that looks fascinating. And I said, oh, I'll send you the book. And I went on Amazon to look for it, and it wasn't there.
Yeah, no, it's not on Amazon yet. It's not on. It's not out. I've seen the actual completed a version of it, but it is I'm editing it right now. I'm getting back like a template of it and just going through it and looking at it and making sure everything's the way I like it. And it's coming out really good.
It is fascinating to be your own publisher, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. This is what we were talking about yesterday was I am doing all my books myself now. I'm the company that I'm using now is my own company. It's called Deadwood Publishing LLC. I founded this company in the late summer, early fall of last year, 2016. I am not in business anymore for various reasons, which I'm just going to keep to myself. I'm not in business anymore with the company that I was using before. And what happened was over the summer of last year, I decided I was going to do this myself for various reasons. My relationship, again, somewhat went south on me with the company I was using, and because of that, the books were taken out of print by me. My first two books were taken out of print by me in November of last year. They were republished by me. Let's see, Royal Arch was republished at the end of December of last year. Cinema Symbolism was put out about a month later. I want to say it around the end of about the end of February. Royal Arch of eBooks came out also about a month or so ago now, and the Cinema Symbolism, my second book, Cinema Symbolism: A Guide to Esoteric Imagery in Popular Movies. The print edition is out right now. You can purchase that. The ebooks of that return probably in about 3 or 4 days, no later than a week. So they'll be out. And then again, right behind that, Cinema Symbolism 2, more esoteric imagery in popular movies. That will be out, like I said, in about 2 weeks. The print edition should be available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, with the ebooks probably coming, 2 to 3 weeks after that.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm very excited because, of course, in the first book, I recognized so many of the movies. So, with the second book, what are the new movies you're going into?
Oh, absolutely. Some of the in Cinema Symbolism 2, what is different than Cinema Symbolism 1 is there is in Cinema Symbolism 1, I did sort of movies. I did chapters on like entire genres of movies, like horror movies, for instance, where I did a whole section on like Dracula and the vampire. Then I did Frankenstein's monster, and then I did the werewolf. And this sort of analysis covered all those movies in general, which was good. I wanted to do that. But Cinema Symbolism 2 is much more movie specific. Each chapter covers a string of movies that are related somehow, or a single movie. So some of the movies that we talk about, we get into some of the works of Alan Moore. In this, I have a chapter on 3 of the Alan Moore movies: From Hell, Watchmen, and V for Vendetta. I break down 4 of the 4 David Lynch's movies. These are very complex. David Lynch. I break down Dune, Mulholland Drive. We get into Mulholland Drive, Blue Velvet and Lost Highway. Those are very complex movies. There was a lot of heavy lifting in those. I do I break down all the Harry Potter films. There's some interesting things going on in those. Each one of those movies, the Harry Potter films, except for the last one, which is the same movie broken in half, is a version of the monomyth. There's other hidden symbolism in them, but each one of those movies contains the monomythic elements, all but to a T. It's uncanny how much those movies repeat themselves when it comes to the monomyth. Same things with the Chronicle of Narnia, the C.S. Lewis movies. This is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Prince Caspian, and Voyage of the Dawn Treader. When I wrote Cinema Symbolism, I did the J.R.R. Tolkien Lord of the Rings movies. I promised myself that I would do the C.S. Lewis material. So that's in Cinema Symbolism 2. Some of the other movies, let's see. We do Walt Disney. There's a chapter on some of the Walt Disney movies. Walt Disney gets an incredibly bad rap out there. Some of this is dark material, but a lot of this predates Walt Disney. This is coming from the fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm, things like that. But I do break down some of his movies, such as Escape from Witch Mountain, Escape to Witch Mountain, and Return from Witch Mountain. The Lion King, which is, again, is a solar allegory. That's the Egyptian, Osirian myth, all over again. So we have a chapter on Walt Disney. Then I have a chapter on horror movies again. Some of the horror movies I break down are The Shining, Suspiria. There's a really fascinating study with a movie that came out about 1.5 years ago. It's actually slowed the writing of the book down because I wanted to include it in the worst way. And I did include it, and it's a really interesting. It's a good movie anyway. But there's a whole subtext of this movie. It's really a multi-layered symbolic movie. In fact, I would say to you, it's one of the most symbolic movies I've seen probably in the past 3 years. It's called Crimson Peak, which is incredibly rich with symbolism. And there's a whole I don't know how to describe it. It's almost a movie within a movie, of The Shining. That movie, the parallels with Crimson Peak and The Shining are so astounding. It would just blow you away. And then let's see, what's some of the other movies I talk about? I break down some Western movies. This is probably one of my favorite genres for me, is the Western. So I really get into movies such as The Magnificent Seven. This is the original one. I haven't seen the remake yet. And of course, the spaghetti westerns of Leone. The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, Fistful of Dollars, and a Few Dollars More, which are rich with archetypal imagery, the Christ figure. And let me just point out also that my publishing company, Deadwood Publishing, if you're out there listening, that actually has a double meaning. Of course, printing, a lot of people in the industry, myself included, consider books, dead wood because they're paper from trees that have been chopped down. But one of my all-time favorite TV shows that used to air on HBO was Deadwood. So I went that way with it. I thought, oh, that has a nice ring to it, Deadwood Publishing. And it has a double meaning of the print copies. And of course, Deadwood was one of my favorite all-time TV shows. So we do a chapter on Western movies. The Martin Scorsese Gangs of New York movie is the final chapter of the book. That's very interesting as well. That has a lot of archetypal imagery in it. That has an entirely, what's the word I'm looking for? Subcurrent undertext of religious symbolism, with Bill the Butcher and the Leonardo DiCaprio character sort of being this God versus the devil conflict. So yeah, I mean, those are some of the movies that are going on in Cinema Symbolism too. It took me longer to write than I probably anticipated. It's coming in, like I said, at around 680 pages. I have seen the finished version of it. And I am really pleased with the way it came out. And at this point in time, there's really no other way to say it. I'm just anxious to release it at this point, and get it out there. And like I said, the print copies, I anticipate should be out in about 2 weeks. I don't see it going any longer than that. 3 at the top, first week of April at the absolute longest. But, this book should be out by the end of March, I'm thinking.
Well, for anybody that is at all fascinated with this way of looking at movies, I mean, you can cut your teeth on Cinema Symbolism 1. And I found that first of all, I had seen most of the movies you covered. So that was really cool. But then once I had, gone through your book and could see the correlations you were drawing between the archetypes and the movies, I had to then go back and watch all the movies that I hadn't seen, and then go back and read what you had written about them, because then it became a game. Am I going to catch them? Am I going to see the symbolisms that he talks about? And I will admit, I had read the book through once, so that when I watched the movie, I sort of knew what I was looking for, but I wasn't catching it all. And it enhances the story that is told on the screen when you understand the archetypes that are being presented to you and how they create a play, as well as the story behind the movie. And I truly believe that movie producers and people who write for the movies understand the archetype stuff, because some of these movies just are so close to them. And of course, the 2 movies that I want you to see are Interstellar and Avatar. So I hope you put them in line for Cinema Symbolism 3.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. It's funny. I get requested for Interstellar a lot. I still have not seen that. Avatar, I think I saw, that's James Cameron. I believe I saw that once, but years ago. I wouldn't get into an analysis. It would definitely need to be rewatched. But yeah, absolutely. You are 100% correct when you say you have to watch these movies multiple times to pick up on this. And this is absolutely true. And I'll tell this funny story now. I've held off telling it in the past, because for various reasons. I wanted to keep this to myself, and this is one of my all-time favorite little esoteric homages that is in a movie. And I'll share with you for the first time. It's not in Cinema Symbolism 1. It should have been, but it's actually in Cinema Symbolism 2. And this is really, I mean, when you say to me, yeah, this is intentionally placed, I get that, I get not backlash, but I get people, not often anymore, but say, oh, well, maybe it's a coincidence, or it's just happenstance. That's absolute nonsense. And I'll just tell the story. I mean, and this goes to show you the level to what these people, how their mind works on this. When I was writing Cinema Symbolism, and let me just say again, to do a really proper analysis, you have to watch these movies multiple times. I mean, it took me viewing Crimson Peak 4 or 5 times. I have it here on Blu-ray. Just to pick up on all this stuff and to pick up on the subtext of The Shining that is going on in that film. I must have watched Crimson Peak 10 times. And it was just astonishing to me. And then I had to watch The Shining. And I mean, I basically had to watch these movies all but side by side. But let me just tell the story real quick, because this is something that's in Cinema Symbolism 2, but should have been in Cinema Symbolism 1. I was writing Cinema Symbolism 1, and one of the movies that I covered in that, somewhat briefly, but it's in there, and I pick up on this, as I promised I would in Cinema Symbolism 2, was Black Swan with Natalie Portman. This is the Darren Aronofsky movie. I covered this movie in Cinema Symbolism from the angle of archetypes, as they are contained in the Tarot. If you read the works of Carl Gustav Jung, the psychiatrist, he believed that Tarot imagery was a reflection of the archetypes. And he's right. I firmly believe that. And you will find these archetypes in Black Swan without question. I mean, you have the Natalie Portman character, that's the moon. You have the mother character. This is the Barbara Hershey character, who is the Queen of Swords. You have the Lily character, who is the juggler. You have the Winona Ryder character, who is the tower, the self-destructive personality. You have the devil masculine manipulator, which is Leroy. And I'm writing Cinema Symbolism, and I'm writing all this out. And I'm watching Black Swan again, because in Cinema Symbolism 2, this is a movie that I revisited to take on this alchemical storyline that's also going on. That alchemy really is, this idea of transition of the self is something that it really fascinates me, and is really a major, if you ask me, one of the major themes of Cinema Symbolism 2, it is alchemical transition in film of a character. But anyway, I'm watching Cinema Symbolism's just coming out. And I'll share the story. And like I said, I've never talked about this because I wanted to keep it to myself. I'm not, to my knowledge, I'm the only person who knows about this. I'm watching Cinema Symbolism. I'm finishing Cinema Symbolism, the first book, and it's about to go to press. And I'm watching Black Swan because I'm actually writing Cinema Symbolism 2 at this point. And I'm watching Black Swan. I'm writing Cinema Symbolism 2. I'm watching Black Swan, and there's a scene at the beginning of this where Natalie Portman's character is going into the ballet studio or the theater where they're producing the play, and she turns and looks at a giant banner of the Winona Ryder character. I mean, this is just fascinating. And it's a picture of the Winona Ryder character, and it's just something like Fall Classics Revisited. Tickets on sale February 12th. And for some reason, that date of February 12th just jumped off the screen at me. And I was like, what? I know this guy, Darren Aronofsky. I know this can't be a coincidence. I've watched his movie too many times. And this should have actually been in Cinema Symbolism, but, we talk about, watching these movies and you got to go back and see them because you're always missing stuff. Sure enough, I began researching the date of February 12th, and of all damn things, that is a reference to the date of February 12th, 1888, or it's the late 1800s. The year isn't important. It's the late 19th century. A Russian ballerina was born on that date named Anna Palava. And Anna Palava created a ballet off of the Swan Lake production in the late 19th century, early 20th century, called The Dying Swan, of all things. And if you watch the movie, this links her to the Winona Ryder character, who, of course, is self-destructive and is trying to kill herself. And the placement of the date of February 12th is actually conjuring Anna Palava and this play she produced, this ballet she produced called The Dying Swan, which is a reference to the Winona Ryder character. And if you think I'm stretching this point, I mean, this just goes to show you the length that these people will go to hide these numbers and these little hidden clues in these movies. If you actually watch Black Swan and you watch the end credits roll, they actually bill the characters according to how they appear on screen. I believe, for example, Natalie Portman is billed as Nina Sayers, the Swan Queen. And actually, when you get to Winona Ryder, when she comes up, you can watch this for yourself. You can throw it in, after the interview's over, or if anyone's listening out there, Winona Ryder is actually credited as the dying swan. And this date of February 12th is completely linking this nexus to the Winona Ryder character and this Russian ballerina named Anna Pavlova. I've never talked about this before. The reason I bring this up, it's in Cinema Symbolism too now. I can talk about this, but when I discovered this, Cinema Symbolism was actually going to presses, and I felt like saying no, wait, I got to add this. I want to add this to the book because this should have actually gone in Cinema Symbolism Part 1. But it's in Cinema Symbolism too. This date reference to Anna Pavlova and Black Swan, and this just goes to show you the lengths that these movie makers will go to encode these little clues and riddles and esoteric homages in their films. And that this is the first time on radio. I haven't been on the radio now for 7.5 months. I took a break back in August. I was on a stint for 3.5 years. But now with Cinema Symbolism 2 coming out, I'm returning in full force. I got your show was the first one. I've got another show booked next week. I'll be doing more shows in April to promote this. But yeah, I mean, that's something that really should have gone in Cinema Symbolism. So yeah, I mean, people sometimes saying, oh, maybe it's a coincidence. Believe me, that is no coincidence. If this whole thing falls apart, if that's the date of February 11th or February 13th, but that date of February 12th just forms this perfect occult nexus to Pavlova and the Winona Ryder character. It's really extraordinary.
Now, for those that I jumped in because we've talked quite a few times, so that I throw archetypes out like everybody knows what they are, and not everybody does know what the archetypes are. So,
what is it?
Yeah, I mean, explain to people what these archetypes are and how they are inserted into movies and the purpose for them.
Right. An archetype is a certain type of character that embodies certain types of qualities. And their purpose, and I'm just generalizing here, we could go on all night for this, but their qualities are, somewhat universal. For example, like, the solar savior, the hero archetype, the person who confronts the dark evil lord, the villain, the trickster, that's a critical one. The Joker type, the wizard, the old hermit who lives by himself, who knows everything. These are what are called the archetypes. These are all part of our subconscious mind, and they're inherited. If you're a fan of Carl Jung, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. If you are not a fan of Carl Jung or you're new to this, Jung hypothesized, and I believe him, although it technically can't be proven, but that's okay, that these archetypal images are embedded in our subconscious mind, and they become conscious through studying them. But they're always there. If you've never heard of this, they're embedded there. It's just part. It's what's part of the collective unconscious. What he deems as inherited. That means it doesn't have to be taught to a person. It's just part of this. It's just part of every human being's subconscious mind. It's collective, just for that exact reason, because everybody has it. The Greek philosopher Plato also talked about this. In fact, Jung is sort of the inheritor of it. Plato called this exact same thing the theory of forms, which is just another way of saying the archetypes. That there were these certain forms and inherited qualities. And you will find this not only in movies but in mythology. Think of Perseus. And the quests, or Hercules and the quests, and Luke Skywalker and his journey. It's all boils down to exactly the same sort of thing. So these archetypes are just these figures that are, whether they be the hero or the villain or the mother or the trickster, that are just embedded in our subconscious minds. And you will find these archetypes in just about, even in all movies in some form or fashion, but in really a lot of the blockbusters, you will find these archetypes. They just repeat themselves. They're the exact same character, just rebranded with a new name and slightly, and sometimes they don't even really change their appearance. Look at for example, Gandalf the Grey in Lord of the Rings, and Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars, and then you have Albus Dumbledore in the Harry Potter films. It's the same character. It is the exact same character. The character who's the wizard, the old hermit, the old graybeard, you want to call him.
And then Back to the Future, you've got
Doc Brown. It's the same character.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So there always is mostly, the solar whatever, the savior. Is that always male or is it female from time to time?
Yeah, I mean, when the sun is the symbol of the masculine, but certainly you do have I believe we talked about this maybe the last time I was on. You certainly do have the heroine figure. You could call her a savior archetype because she usually does battle a dark evil lord. But you could call her a lunar, heroine as well. The moon reflects the sun's light, so you could go that path as well. It's I'm just parsing words. It's somewhat the same thing. Yeah, absolutely. You can have the female be this character. I think too. The two that jump off the page at me when we talk about this is sort of Ellen Ripley in the Alien movies.
Yes.
The hero, the female hero who's doing battle with the dark evil figure, the alien, that's hiding in the shadow. And then the other one that comes to mind, and it's probably even more so than that one, is and this would be more the television show than the movie. There was a movie released, but the movie kind of flopped, and it's much more known for the TV show, and that's Buffy the Vampire Slayer with Sarah Michelle Gellar. The hero who is battling the dark vampires, and it's funny you mentioned this to me because I just threw out a tweet about this about a week ago. The Sarah Michelle Gellar Buffy the Vampire Slayer character is sort of like James Bond. I would describe them both as sort of these, what I would call a Manichaean. What's that? Sort of a person who sees the world in black and white terms. I'm the good guy, they're the bad guy, they must be destroyed. So with Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Ellen Ripley, yeah, I would absolutely say you could have the the woman be the heroine figure, no doubt about it.
Well, that's that's a little consoling because it felt for a while that all of these. So you've got the solar savior, the trickster, the wizard, the mother. Is there an evil archetype, or would that be the trickster?
No, the usually the devil would be the evil archetype, and this would be sort of what you would call your dark evil figure character, Mephistopheles. This would be Darth Vader, Sauron, in Lord of the Rings. This would be, of course, Voldemort. Lord Voldemort in the Harry Potter movies. Yeah, I mean, it's this, when you look into these movies, like with Luke Skywalker being, I mean, I've talked about this before, being, the sort of the solar avatar, doing battle with the Sith, the dark evil lord. I mean, it's sort of the farm boy plucked from the general populace to go on this, this savior quest to save the galaxy from these dark, ruling archetypes, the Darth Vader, the Mephistopheles figure, the Emperor, same sort of surrogate, as it were. I mean, you turn to the Harry Potter movies or books as well. I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, it really is. I mean, you have, like with Luke Skywalker, you have the two helpers, in Han Solo and Luke and Princess Leia. Well, you turn to Harry Potter, it's the schoolboy who's awkward, who's picked from the general populace, who has the two friends, Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger, and is put on this messianic quest to save the wizarding world from this dark evil figure, Lord Voldemort. I mean, it's all but the same story. I mean,
absolutely.
I mean, it's veiled differently. It has different names. The characters are different, but I mean, even the Lord of the Rings movies. The one of the movies I break down, the Chronicle of Narnia stories by C.S. Lewis. Each one of those contain these monomythic elements, and these same sort of figure types. The Winter Queen, who wants to rule in darkness. And you have, who do they? I mean, my goodness gracious, I mean, who is she opposed by? The solar lion Aslan, who is, of course, Leo the lion. I mean, it's, light, right, dark, all over again. So, yeah, I mean, again, it's a really, interesting study that starts with cinema symbolism and carries on in cinema symbolism too. And like I said, at this point in time, the book is, like I said, I've seen templates of the book. I'm really happy with the way it came out. And, you know, at this point in time, up until now, I kind of kept it to myself. I didn't want this material out there. I sort of, you know, was selfishly holding it back. But like, you know, that nexus with Palava, Anna Palava with Black Swan, you know, I'm certainly open now to discussing some of the stuff in cinema symbolism too. And I as we spoke yesterday on the phone briefly, yeah, I'm also with Cinema Symbolism too, really wrapping up, and believe you me, thank God, you know, I'm really looking forward to getting this out there. My third book, my attention will be turned now to finishing off my first work of fiction, which is called A Pact with the Devil. At least that's the working title of it. It'll probably stay though. I kind of like that title. And this book is probably about 55% done. But finally, you know, I can just concentrate on this and just finish this baby off, and then. My goal with that is hopefully to have that out. I'm going to do everything I can in my power to have Pact with the Devil out by Christmas of this year, but we'll see. Yeah, I mean, yeah, Pact with the Devil by Christmas. So, but we'll
okay.
See. Yeah.
So in writing this book,
Which
now,
one?
A Pact with the Devil.
Yes.
In doing a work of fiction,
Yes.
obviously you have built into it your archetypes, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I believe there's elements of the monomyth in this. I have in this, I somewhat think of, so what I like to think of in this is sort of like anti-archetypes. Is I believe all the characters are flawed. There is no, there is really no hero of this story. There is just really shades of gray, and I think that makes it a little different. But we have this was a story. I believe I mentioned this in one of your previous shows, but I'll say it again. This was a story that came to me almost to the day. This was in April of around 13, so almost 4 years ago. This was an entire story that came to me in a dream. And when I say a dream, I literally mean that. It wasn't like I was out just, you know, daydreaming or something in the backyard or whatever. I mean, it's I was sound asleep, and I dreamt this story that is you know, was the template of A Pact with the Devil. There's certain portions of this that I'm going to keep to myself, you know, until the book's out, of course. But no, I get into some of it with you. I mean, it deals with a witch's coven. It takes place in modern times. It does not take place in ancient history or anything. It takes place in modern day. And ultimately, it involves a lot of conspiracy theory. The Freemasons are in it. There's a murder mystery. There's some erotica in it. And there's a lot of, you know, what I would call, it's almost like every character is almost like a villain in a way. I don't even know if there's really a hero of it. I guess there's one character who kind of jumps to mind who's sort of like, you know, there's two characters in it who I dare say are almost like Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, but they're kind of like screw-ups almost. Yeah, I mean, I'm really pleased with the way it's coming out. It's different. I mean, I think it is at any rate. I can think of no other story that's like it. And what really fascinated with me with this was that I dreamt it. You know, the dream was very lucid. It was very clear. The names were given to me. The story played out. And when I woke up that morning, I wrote and made about 5 or 6 pages of copious notes about it. And actually, believe it or not, this was back in, let's see, April of 13. So back in April of 13, I was actually writing Cinema Symbolism. I actually took about a week off and just started outlining this thing and making character notes and writing it. And I wrote the author's admonition. And you know, I like it. It's my first work of fiction. And you know, in the interim, what ultimately happened with this was about a little over a year ago. I got to the point I was writing. Cinema Symbolism came out in the summer of 14 originally, and at that point when that came out, I started concentrating on A Pact with the Devil and Cinema Symbolism 2. I was writing them both at the same time. This didn't work out very well. Well, it worked well at first, but around January of a year ago, around January of 16, I got to the point where I was around 60% done on both books. I couldn't do them anymore. It was too hard to keep track of. So at that point, I kind of put Pact with the Devil on sort of the back burner, and I really concentrated on finishing Cinema Symbolism 2. What happened was, and again, I'll just get into this briefly, was Cinema Symbolism 2 was done in July of last year. It was done complete. It was done as far as I could take it. At that point in time, I was sort of planning on submitting it to the company that I was using. But as we were talking about yesterday, that never happened. My relationship with them, without getting too detailed specific, just went in a different direction. And I decided to do Cinema Symbolism 2 myself. I copyrighted it myself. That's not hard to do. I copyrighted Royal Arch of Enoch myself. Cinema Symbolism 2 was originally, I guess the point I'm trying to make was Cinema Symbolism 2 was originally supposed to be out by around, December of last year. But because, I got out of my business relationship with the company I was using, this basically backed everything up for around 6 or 7 months. I had to republish Royal Arch of Enoch. I had to republish Cinema Symbolism. This was time and effort. I had to buy computer software here for my computer to reformat these books. I re-edited them to a certain extent. And let me just say this for the audience who's listening, because this is critical also. If you're looking for my books, Royal Arch of Enoch, what I did was I basically called it a second edition. I retired the first edition. So anytime you see Royal Arch of Enoch or Cinema Symbolism, they are now second editions. So, don't be afraid of that. That's what you want to buy. Because these books were re-edited. They were retweaked a little bit. Some portions were added or revised. So when you see Royal Arch of Enoch and Cinema Symbolism and you see second edition, that is me. That is the book. And the publishing company is Deadwood Publishing. So if you see that, that's me. That's the correct copy. That's the book you want to buy. But just to wrap up, Cinema Symbolism should have been out a couple months ago, but because I'm doing this myself, it basically backed everything up for 6-7 months. So I can report that Cinema Symbolism 2 will be out in about 2 weeks. Thank God. And then I can really concentrate to finish off A Pact with the Devil, which I will do everything in my power to get out by the end of the year.
Wow, that's ambitious. That's amazingly ambitious, but exciting as well.
I'm thrilled with it. I'm really pleased. I know you haven't seen it yet, or the audience hasn't as well, but I'm really pleased with the way I've seen the templates of Cinema Symbolism 2 completed. I've seen the finished book, and I'm really pleased with the way it came out. I'm really happy with it. I can't wait to get it out and start doing radio again about it. Like I said, the print copies of it's coming in, give or take, at around 680 pages. The print copies of this should be out in about 2 weeks or so. As I've been doing this also, Pact with the Devil, my first work of fiction, just hasn't gone by the wayside. I have been devoting some time on it. It's funny when you write a work of fiction and then you let it sit, and then you go back to it. A lot of it, I can really say on that I'm trimming a lot of fat out of it. I'm making it much more readable, making the story much more digestible. There's certain portions that I'm editing out that really, the one thing I've learned when you write a work of fiction is a lot of it will wind up on the cutting room floor. But that's okay. It makes it much more readable and much more digestible and much more entertaining, I believe.
Amazing. Well, I think, when people see the title of your book, Cinema Symbolism, they don't understand that not only is it these archetypes that you draw in and you that have been integrated into movies and or / books. It is the occult and numerology and astrology and mythological stuff and alchemical stuff and the tarot and the Kabbalah. It's symbols from all of these different modalities that are just subtly put in place that literally take you on a subconscious journey of a story that is overlaid whatever you are seeing on the screen. That there are other symbols that sort of are in many ways guideposts as to this is the journey, this is what's going on, this is what's happening inside of them, and it really enhances the story of the movie that you're watching, that you don't even know it's being enhanced by. That's what just blows me away.
Oh, I agree with you. You're absolutely correct, Barbara. We are not only talking about archetypes, but, we are talking about numbers, numerology, the occult. We are talking about ancient religions, Gnosticism, no question about it, Kabbalah. We talked about earlier this date of February 12th, which looks completely innocuous on screen. Probably paid no attention to it. myself included. I mean, it took me, this was like the 6th or 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th time I saw it before I noticed that date. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking to myself, well, if I know Darren Aronofsky the way I think I know him, I know that date's going to have some meaning. And sure enough, it has huge meaning in the movie. It's incredible. And, you get into Kabbalah, one of the movies I take on, and it's you get remakes of it. But one of the movies I took on was the Errol Flynn Robin Hood movie. Which is Kabbalah, which is the Tree of Life and its tarot equivalent. That entire Robin Hood story is really walking the Robin Hood story is like walking on the Tree of Life. You find the different tarot, you find the different archetypal imagery. It's incredible with that story. I mean, that deals with a lot of Kabbalah and its relation to the tarot as well. But no, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you get into numbers, and this is something I've talked about before with like cinema symbolism. For example, like with the Back to the Future movies, with the number 88, how that ties into the date on the clock tower, the time of day at 10:04, which is October 4th, and that's the 88 days left to the solar year, and the chariot, the sun chariot of Apollo or Horus being the DeLorean. I mean, it's a lot of ancient religion. Numbers can be used very adroitly by these filmmakers. One of the ones that I liked was in the movie From Hell. This was the Alan Moore movie, and there's a ton going on in that movie. This was based on the Alan Moore comic book where Jack the Ripper, who is Sir William Gull, is using Freemasonry and these Masonic rituals to essentially affect a form of alchemy. He's turning Masonic rituals into a form of chaos magic to negatively affect the 20th century. He says so in the movie, and I thought that there was that in the movie Sir William Gull, who is the Freemason, who is, I don't want to give the movie away. It's been out long enough, but I guess I have to. Who's also Jack the Ripper, pretty obvious. Well, what I thought was kind of neat in this is he's really perverting Freemasonry, and he's using it very darkly, in this dark fashion for these alchemical purposes. And I thought it was unique. If you watch the movie, if you watch From Hell, Sir William Gull lives. They don't give you the street address, but it doesn't matter. But the number on his door is 74. And I thought, well, of all the numbers to pick, 74, 74, of course, is 47 backwards. And 47 is, of course, a reference to Freemasonry, which is the 47th proposition of Euclid, which is, the token of a worshipful master and denotes Masonic rulership. So I thought that was really interesting. By putting 47 backwards on his door, you're kind of denoting this backwards sort of Freemasonry, the sort of degenerate form of Freemasonry that the Jack the Ripper character is engaging in to alchemically affect the 20th century. I thought that was very unique and subtle. I really like that. But I guess you'd probably have to be a Freemason to pick up on something like that.
I think so.
Yeah. But I mean, again, this just points out, you mentioned to me, the lengths these guys will go to conceal this stuff. I mean, that's one. The February 12th date is another one. Gosh, I'm trying to think. I mean, wait do you see these stuff in when you read the book? The one point. I mean, I couldn't even get in with you. I'd have to pull up another page on the screen because I can't remember them all. But when you get to the horror movie chapter, the parallels between The Shining and Crimson Peak is just astounding. I mean, I guess if I had to say, if there's one part of the book that I really stands out more than all the others, there is this in I believe it's chapter 4 or 5. It's the chapter on horror movies. One of them, I break down The Shining.
Let's do that, because most people have seen The Shining, so that they'll be able to relate and sort of understand where you're coming from with all of the archetypes and everything.
Right. Well, the Shining, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining has a lot going on many levels. Again, I'll just go over this briefly. I don't think we could devote enough time to go over The Shining, but you have this whole idea that it's an alchemical movie. The Shining is decidedly an alchemical movie. And how do you know an alchemical movie when you see one? Usually it involves a character starting as one thing and ending up something else. And it's usually something completely different than what they start out as. So you have the Jack Torrance character who starts off as sort of this kind of oddball, failed writer character and winds up as this psychopath at the end. So you have this alchemical transition going on in the movie. Another movie, probably one of the greatest alchemical movies of all time, is Black Swan. That would be another one. But getting back to The Shining, when you're dealing with alchemical movies, and this is again something I've held back on, I haven't talked about this in any other interview. Generally, when you're dealing with an alchemical movie, what the movie makers like to do, and they all do this, so they're all aware of this. When you're dealing with alchemy, you're talking 4 stages of Renaissance alchemy, and they're Latin terms. It's nigredo, albedo, rubedo, and citrinatus. And it stands for it's blackening the moon, the yellow, the sun, and the rubedo is the red, which is the magnum opus completed. When you're dealing with an alchemical movie, these 4 color schemes will show up on a film. Generally, physically, actually, you will see the color, or they embody a character, and usually that character is surrounded by that color. And this goes without saying. It's a very complex study. You'll understand it more when you read the book. But in The Shining, you will find this color scheme dotted throughout the entire movie, and it's critical to understanding the alchemical transition. So, like for example, real quick, the color red in an alchemical movie is alchemical completion. That means the magnum opus is complete, the philosopher's stone has been perfected, and the alchemical transmutation has been complete. So, I mean, in The Shining, for example, we have the Jack Torrance character at the very end, who's a psychopath. The alchemical transmutation is complete. So what does Kubrick do? Well, he dumps gallons of red blood, the rubedo, the red, down the hallways, and he does that on purpose to say the Torrance transition is complete. The alchemical.
Okay. We've got a break coming up. We'll be back in 3 minutes, and we'll finish this up. So, Robert, we're back with red paint being thrown down the hallways.
Yeah, I'm back. Can you hear me all right? Everything loud and clear?
Loud and clear.
Yeah, well, it was funny too because during the commercial break, just real quick, I couldn't help but listen to the one out that features the Monty Python excerpts. Yeah, that's one of my all-time favorite movies, and of course, if you know Cinema Symbolism, you know I break down the King Arthur or a Royal Arch of Enoch. I break down the King Arthur stuff. But anyway, The Shining, yes. Just back real quick. We have an alchemical story going on in there, but then also, and probably the more interesting portion of this is because Kubrick really wreaks havoc with your both your conscious and your subconscious mind on this, is in the, you know, and I'm just condensing here because of time, but in the whole premise of this book is this sort of vicious reincarnation cycle going on inside the Overlook. In fact, you really never really figure out what's going on. You know, I mean, you can watch this movie 100 times and you really never know. I mean, it ends with this epistemological conundrum where you get shown the photo at the end, and you don't know who this is. I mean, is this Delbert Grady? Is this Charles Grady? I mean, it's obviously some sort of reincarnation going on, but you're never really fully informed as to who this character is in the photo. And it ties into with when Jack Nicholson is talking to the guy, I think it's Delbert Grady in the men's room, well, if that's Delbert Grady, then who's the guy on the photo at the end? So you have this really vicious reincarnation cycle going on inside the Overlook Hotel. And the way Kubrick bombards your mind with this is through repetition. He repeats things over and over again to sort of symbolize this never-ending, Ouroboros going on inside the Overlook Hotel. In fact, I'll share this with you in Cinema Symbolism 2. The portion that I break down The Shining, I actually called it transcendental repetition inside the Overlook Hotel, or transcendental repetition and the Overlook Hotel, I believe is what I called it. And he does this by just presenting a series of numbers and imagery on the film, which is all doubles. That's the only way I can describe it. It's just endless doubles. I mean, it goes everywhere from the two little girls, and then of course, there's the scene in it where Ullman is. You have the two mazes in the film, the indoor maze, which is the dark corridors of the hotel, and then you have the natural outdoor maze. So you have two mazes in the movie. There are two African Americans in the movie. He, the Scatman Crothers character and Durkin, the guy who runs the auto mechanic shop. There's two African Americans. There's the scene where Ullman is showing the Torrances their digs, their apartment in the Overlook, and Ullman is walking by and he says, what do you say? Have a great winter, girls. And it's two twins walking by, and it's right after Kubrick has just shown you the twin little girls. So and again, it's numbers that repeat, that tie into the number 237, the number 47 that repeats. I'd have to actually pull the document up here, but the Shining, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, is just a temple of repetition, and the reason he does that is to just bombard both your conscious and your subconscious mind of this vicious reincarnation cycle going on inside the Overlook. In fact, there's points in it. I mean, it's the characters even say lines back to each other. The two ghosts of the twin little girls say something to Danny, something we could stay here, play with us forever and ever. Then a few minutes later, Jack Torrance says that to his son when they're sitting on the bed. He says, I could stay here in this hotel forever and ever. So they repeat lines back to each other. And Wendy Torrance, Shelley Duvall does the same trick with the son when they're about to go into the hedge maze for the first time. So you have a ton of repetition going on inside The Shining. And then this was something I talked about in the first book. I keep saying that the first movie book, Cinema Symbolism, first book was Royal Arch of Enoch. In Cinema Symbolism, you had this whole interplay with the Overlook Hotel sort of being this dark side of America constructed over the Indian nations, buried on the Indian burial ground. You have it's sort of representing this dark, opulent side of the United States. I mean, and what is it? All the best people come here, all the politicians, all the starlets from Hollywood, all the Hollywood types. If you pay attention to this, it has this incredibly racist element and misogynistic element. I mean, the domain of women and blacks are the kitchen in the Overlook. It's a great movie anyway, but you have this whole idea of the dark side of America going on inside the Overlook. It's a great film study. I talk about it in Cinema Symbolism. I talk about it briefly in Cinema Symbolism, but it's a movie I break down, I think, pretty thoroughly inside Cinema Symbolism too.
Well, I was just thinking about all of this, the fact that the archetypes are there and that they trigger something in us. But I would think also, as an author or as someone who is writing, you have the archetypes embedded inside of you so that you will probably subliminally put them in places where you don't expect you're putting them without knowing that you're doing it, so that it's going to be interesting once your book is done to go back and take a look at it and find the symbolism in it.
Yeah, with like A Pact with the Devil, there are definitely elements of the monomyth in there. I could say that for certain. But yeah, I mean, it's when I think of Pact with the Devil, I almost consider, there are movies where you have anti-archetypes, where I'm trying to think of one. Where it's kind of like, what's the one movie? I'm drawing a blank on it, but I actually talk about this in the movie where it's sort of like almost anti-archetypes, and they're kind of fun to watch too. Kind of like I think of movies almost like it's the movie that really kind of jumps off the page with this is it was a B movie horror film that came out in the 1980s. It was almost like a reversed Breakfast Club, where the Breakfast Club, you had the archetypes, the jock, the nerd, the preppy girl, the loner, the outcast, and the misfit. But then they did a movie a few years later. It was a horror movie. It was called Return of the Living Dead. This is one of my all-time favorite movies. And you had these exact characters appearing on screen, but they completely reverse it. Where in the Breakfast Club, if you remember the Breakfast Club, this was the John Hughes movie, the coming of age movie that, I'm Generation X, so everyone in Generation X has seen this movie, where you had, they were all fighting each other. They didn't get along, and they were, the whole movie was predicated on them trying to figure each other out, and they ultimately got along. And then you had the adult character who they were all enemies with. They couldn't stand the overseer of the detention. I forget his name. But they were all at odds with him. They couldn't stand him at all. And the whole movie was about them just trying to fit in with each other. It's the Breakfast Club. Everyone knows it. Well, a few years later, a horror movie came out called Return of the Living Dead. It's a long story. I won't get into it. It was a sequel to George Romero's Night of the Living Dead. There was actually two sequels of this movie made. One was Return of the Living Dead. One was Dawn of the Dead. It's a long story as to how these movies got made. I won't get into it, but Return of the Living Dead has almost what I call anti-archetypes in it, because the same archetypes, I mentioned this in Cinema Symbolism, the same archetypes that are in Breakfast Club, sort of, the weirdo, the preppy girl, sort of the cool guy, the jock character. They're all hanging out together. They're all best friends. They're not at each other's. They're not at odds at all. They all hang out together. I'm watching this. I'm like, God, this is kind of crazy. I mean, usually these characters break off and form cliques. They stay to their own. In Return of the Living Dead, they're all together. They're all hanging out together. And not only that, what they actually do that makes it even more interesting is they actually work with the adults to problem solve. I mean, the adults in the movie are not their enemy. They actually become friends with them. So it's sort of this anti-archetypal imagery. And that can make for interesting movies too. And like I said, with A Pact with the Devil, I mean, I guess, you're definitely going to have some archetypes in there. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. You do have, sort of, some dark figures going on in it. There's probably more dark figures in it than there are heroic figures. But I, like I said, I like the story as it's turning out. Like I said, it was a dream. And I'll mention this in passing. I think I mentioned this on one of your other shows when I was on. The Pact with the Devil story came to me entirely in a dream when I was sleeping. Like I said, I woke up the next morning and began outlining it. But of course, in doing this, and the dream occurred, I think, in April of 2013. So I believe it's been almost 4 years now. I immediately began, well, not immediately, I began researching to see if anyone else had anything like this. And sure enough, I found out that Mary Shelley actually dreamt Frankenstein, and that Robert Louis Stevenson dreamt Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and that H.P. Lovecraft actually dreamt some of the mythology around the Necronomicon, in Miskatonic University. So, I was pleased to find that out. So, like I said, I don't know what's going to happen with this story. I know you've told me before when I've done shows that, when something like this usually happens, you're meant to do it in this world, perhaps planted in your mind from a higher power or a higher consciousness. I really have no reason to argue with you on that. And like I said, I'm just really pleased right now that in a couple of weeks I can get my third book out, Cinema Symbolism 2. And then I'll be working on my first work of fiction. I'll be really working hard to get that out before Christmas. And then, as you said at the top of the hour, or at the top of the last hour, Cinema Symbolism 3, I've already got movies in mind for that. And Freemasonry and the Path of Babylon, that's also being outlined. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I just out of curiosity, because the very first time that I interviewed you, I always make it a point to make sure I have read all the books that the person has published, unless, of course, it's somebody like Stephen King, and then forget it.
Right.
But so I had tried to read the Arch of Enoch and found that I didn't have enough background in Freemasonry. So then I had to put myself to school to a certain degree to understand Freemasonry better. And when I finally did read it, after I had learned a little bit about Freemasonry, there's an arrogance here of being a certain age, thinking, I can figure this out. Well, no, I couldn't. So I had a bit of research to do. But it taught me a lot, and I'm really grateful to you for that, because it really did drive me crazy that I couldn't get a hook into the material until I knew a little bit more about Freemasonry. So what will the road to Babylon entail?
Right, that's a good question. What I'm anticipating with Freemasonry and the Path to Babylon is, I believe this will sort of fill in some of the gaps with Royal Arch of Enoch. We're going to get more into people like Thomas Smith Webb, who is really critical to this, DeWitt Clinton. There's going to be more material on that. Of course, some of the symbolism, regarding Freemasonry. Of course, I have to write about that. Really, right now, it looks more like a series of essays that I'm trying to tie together is really the best way I can describe it. I have started writing it. I mean, I have portions of it done. And, it's really more at this point in time. I mean, that's, that's probably a couple years away still. I haven't made up my mind yet. After I get Packed with the Devil out, like I said, which I'm really going to do everything in my power to do, try to get it out by the end of this year. I mean, it's just time. It's just time, Barbara. It's like for example with Cinema Symbolism too. I mean, it's a process. It's really a process you have to go through. So, like for example, when I was getting Cinema Symbolism 2 ready to be published, I copyrighted it, and this is when I decided to do this myself. When I was going to do this myself, I copyrighted it around middle of September of last year. Which again, copywriting is easy. You just upload it to the copyright office at the Library of Congress. I had actually copyrighted Royal Arch of Enoch, but at any rate, so I had to go through this process myself, and at that point, I needed to find an editor. And I found an editor through a friend of mine here in Baltimore. And the book is done, but I had to give her 2.5 months to edit it. I mean, I can't. I mean, it's a 700-page book.
Yeah.
I can't say get this back to me in a week. I guess I could. I'd have to pay a fortune for it. But I gave her. I gave her 2.5 months. So I mean, at that point in time, now as it worked out for me, it worked out good because at that point. I talked to her. I talked to the editor. I mean, it's no secret. Her name's in the book. Her name's Wendy Tucker. I talked to Wendy, and she said, "Yeah, I want to edit it. I'm really interested in this." And I said, "That's great." I sent it to her at the first week of October, and I said, "Just get it back to me mid-December around Christmas." She said, "That's great, no problem." She did it. She did, of course, and it was actually worked out to my benefit because at that point, then I could really concentrate on reformatting and re-editing to a degree Royal Arch of Enoch and Cinema Symbolism, which I did. I thought, okay, this is good. Cinema Symbolism 2's away. That's being edited. Let me concentrate now on getting Royal Arch of Enoch and Cinema Symbolism, for my own launch on this. I got him as far as I could. I had to hire a graphic designer. I hired someone here in Baltimore as well to help me with this, with graphic design, for the images and things like that. And and make a long story short, I ended my business relationship with the company I was using in mid-November of last year, and I tried as hard as I could to get these books back out by Christmas. Royal Arch of Enoch and Cinema Symbolism, that is. The company that I was using, I said, take everything down. This was orchestrated by me. I got some emails on this saying, hey, what happened to your books? All the Kindles, all the ebooks were taken down, all the print copies were removed, and I eventually republished Royal Arch of Enoch at the end of December. And it's second edition now, and it's Deadwood Publishing, and the ebook of that is out. That's been fully restored. The print copies are now all over the place. They're in more places than they were before. They're now in places like Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. You can buy them if you live in Europe. You can get them at places like Blackwell's and Waterstones. And the ebooks, likewise, are all back there in the Apple bookstores. This is Royal Arch of Enoch, the Kindle, the Nook. Cinema Symbolism, likewise, the paperback is out, and you can get this, like I said, in Blackwell's, Waterstones, Barnes & Noble. The ebook of Cinema Symbolism should be out in about 5 to 7 days. And like I said, not to beat a dead horse, Cinema Symbolism 2, I can announce will be out in about 2 weeks or so.
Fantastic. That's exciting. So at some point in time, you're going to have to take a deep breath. But it just feels to me as though, you've really poured a tremendous amount of energy. I have to tell you that the material you put out there does wake people up to a greater understanding of what goes on inside of us as we read books or watch movies. And I will also reiterate that the understanding that the Arch of Enoch gives a lot of people as to Freemasonry and what goes into it. I have a far greater respect for Freemasonry than ever before, having done the research and then going back into the Arch of Enoch, because it does open us up to a better understanding of, and you have said you didn't agree with me at once, and then you started to a little bit, that Freemasonry is a spiritual journey into yourself.
Oh, yeah, I agree with that. No, I agree with you there.
And I never understood that. As to me, Freemasonry was, a bunch of guys getting together, and then when you realized, how it was put together and the purpose to it, and the fact that religion and politics aren't really discussed there, and it is a school of self-discovery, for want of a better word.
Oh, absolutely.
And
Yeah, I agree with you there.
so anybody that is involved in Freemasonry, I mean, the first three levels are the Blue Lodge, and most people do that. It's when you go into the other different levels that you start to get amazing spiritual information. And of course the Arch of Enoch, of course, I could relate to, because I knew about Hiram Abiff. So it was kind of like, okay, he's finally hitting places where I can totally relate, and I understand because I know this story. So it was an exciting adventure for me to go back and read that book again with a background in a slight background. I won't say that I have a PhD in it by any means, but I do have a better understanding of you gentlemen that go through this whole process, that there is a great deal to be learned, and where in a lot of your spiritual classes and groups and workshops and stuff, you have basically women. People are led to believe that men don't do any of this kind of study or this kind of journeying, and the reality is all Freemasons do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, unfortunately, I agree with you. I agree with everything you said. I would not disagree in any way, shape, or form. I would say with Freemasonry, I would say the unfortunate problem is, not a problem, I guess it's one of those things where you get out of it what you put in it. And a lot of people just go through the rituals and think nothing of it, and they just come out. And it's really sort of a fault of the lodge system. I mean, it is very spiritual, and it is very religious, and it's very symbolic. And it's very Gnostic. I think that's really what the word is. It's eye-opening. It's meant to bring you to enlightenment of a better selfhood. That's the way I would best describe it. But if you most people, myself included, when you go through it for the first time, you're really not aware of that. And I mean, I went through it's almost like a fraternity house ritual. I went through a fraternity house ritual a few years earlier. As crazy as that's going to sound, they are actually based on Masonic rituals. In fact, most fraternity house rituals were written by Freemasons. A lot of people aren't aware of that. I was a brother of a fraternity house named Lambda Chi Alpha at Gettysburg College, and the guy who wrote the ritual was actually a Freemason. And this is actually true for a lot of the college and even female sororities as well. And they are designed to teach morality and spiritual enlightenment and things like that. But when I went through the Masonic rituals, I mean, I definitely felt they were important, and I definitely felt like I felt the weight of them. I felt like, oh, this is very symbolic and very important. But it was really after I had gone through them. And I think this is the way it is for most Freemasons. I don't know. I can't put words into other people's mouths. But for me, it was really after I'd gone through them, and then finding out, reading the works of, like I said, the people, sort of the Masons that I really relied on in crafting the Royal Arch of Enoch, people like Manly P. Hall, people like Albert Mackey, people like Albert Pike. These were really sort of the people that I looked up to when it came to Masonic philosophy and Masonic symbolism. In fact, I don't know if I've said this on your show or not. I might have. The Royal Arch of Enoch was actually modeled after Manly P. Hall's Secret Teachings of All Ages. I actually modeled the Royal Arch of Enoch after his book as an homage, to Manly P. Hall.
Well, and that book is a book that should be in everybody's library, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, absolutely. I no question about it. I mean, that book is, if you ask me probably to name off, the top 5 books that I've ever read in my life, that would be in the top 5 without question. And like I said, to honor Manly P. Hall, I actually modeled the Royal Arch of Enoch after the Secret Teachings of All Ages. And that book, like you said, just had a tremendous influence on me, as did Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma. A lot of people aren't aware of this, but as crazy as this is going to sound, two of the people that Manly P. Hall actually admired really very much was Albert Pike and Madame Blavatsky. And it's always been said that he modeled his books after theirs, so I modeled my book after his. But certainly, Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma. I mean, if you read Manly P. Hall's Secret Teachings of All Ages, and especially when he gets into Freemasonry and Masonic symbolism, you will find Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma, the fingerprints all over that. So yeah, I mean, and when I was doing Royal Arch of Enoch, I mean, I agree with you. It's definitely spiritual, and you get into biblical figures and the teachings of Enoch and Hiram Abiff and the lost word, and how it ties into divinity. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I believe it is very spiritual. And just I'll just end it on this with Royal Arch. So I guess one of the you talk about you asked me earlier about trying to implant things in your books and do this. I guess one of the things I was really trying to do, I think I did it with Royal Arch of Enoch, was I really wanted to write a book. And I think it's one of the reasons why it's as long as it is. That was sort of like, how can I say? I wanted to write a book. If you had to read one book on Freemasonry, this was going to be the book that sort of, got into everything. I got into the Blue Lodge. I got into the symbolism. I got into the history. I got into the influence. I mean, does it cover everything? No, of course not. You can't. I mean, do I talk about Freemasonry and its role in the American Civil War? No, not really. I mean, you just can't cover every possible subject. But I really felt as though when it came to Masonic symbolism, and I guess that's why I called it The Impact of Masonic Ritual, Philosophy, and Symbolism, I think on those three subtopics, ritual, philosophy, and symbolism, Royal Arch of Enoch, when it comes to the high degrees and Blue Lodge, I really wanted to make my book sort of the premier book to turn to for that, and time will only tell if I succeeded or not. But I will say that for me personally, I'm really happy with the way it came out. I'm thrilled that I was able to do this in my life. And, with all my books, pretty much, the reaction has been very positive. I mean, there's some naysayers out there, of course. That comes with the territory, and
Sure.
I knew that when I was getting involved with it. You can't make everybody happy, and there are people out there, and I don't have to tell you this, who'll just dump on it just for the sake of dumping on it, and that's fine. I understand that, and I expected it, to be honest with you. But I mean, I'm really pleased with the way the first three books came out. And like I said, I'm gearing up for Cinema Symbolism 2. And when that comes out in full force, we'll definitely reschedule and love to come on over the summer, and we'll talk exclusively about that and do another update on Pact with the Devil. And like I said, you asked me about cinema. As far as I'm concerned, right now, we got a half an hour left. You can ask me about any one of my books. We can go back into Royal Arch, Cinema Symbolism. One of the things, I'll just end it on this real quick, was I started doing radio. I may have mentioned this to you yesterday. I started doing radio in January of 2013, and I basically did it for 3.5 years straight. I mean, I was doing at least 2 or 3 shows a month. So when August of last year rolled around, I'd really done it. I'd done every show that was out there. I had done some of them 2 or 3 times. Yeah, I mean, I really. And so, I mean, it was nice to take that break. I was off for 7 months. I was originally planning to take it for about 2 to 3 months. Like I said, my initial plan was to have Cinema Symbolism 2 out before Christmas. That didn't happen, of course. But no, now that Cinema Symbolism 2 is 2 weeks away, I've got another show booked next week. And, I'll be promoting that soon. And, like I said, starting this week and next week, I'm going to be booking shows for April as well. So, yeah, I mean, I'm returning in full force, as it were.
Well, your stuff is fascinating, and there are so many different levels to all of it that you never reach a point where, well, I've heard it all from him, because you can't.
Yeah, but it was for me. Yeah, it was for me. It was like when I started doing this radio in 2013, and I had taken it all the way around to August of. To be honest with you, I mean, it's, I'd taken this around to August of, let's see, 16. So we are talking 3.5 years. And I remember sitting there, I had done like two radio shows, and these were the last 2 I had done. And it was like, how many times can I break down The Wizard of Oz? I mean, how many times can I do this? But people like it. People seem to like listening to it, and I certainly enjoy talking about it. But I remember sitting there thinking to myself, I need a break. I've been doing this radio now, my God, for 3.5 years. Let me at least take a break from it. I mean, I'm beating people to death with Royal Arch of Enoch and John Dee and the Jesuits and the Counter-Reformation and Wizard of Oz and the Matrix. How many times can I break these movies down? So I thought, all right, let me take a break here, which was needed. I mean, it was really nice, taking this little respite and getting Cinema Symbolism 2 out and being able to work on Pact with the Devil. But now that Cinema Symbolism 2 is just really a couple days away from coming out at this point, I'm returning in full force. And like I said, we can talk about anything you want to. We can talk about royal arch, cinema symbolism, cinema zoom.
No, I have a topic I want you to go into. One of the favorite things that you have done, and you've only done it once before, at least on my show, so it's not going to be, a repeat that everybody who listens to my show has heard over and over again. And I don't remember why you did it, but it was my favorite correlation that you've done, and that was, and with all due respect to religion and everything, you did the correlation between the life of Christ and the life of Elvis Presley.
Yeah, that's really an interesting study, isn't it?
I'd love you to go into that because it was fabulous.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought no problem. This is something that I talk about in the first Cinema Symbolism book, in Cinema Symbolism, A Guide to Esoteric Imagery in Popular Movies. I talk about it in that, and I talk about it, actually I bring it up again in Cinema Symbolism too. It's really what I would call a case of Jungian synchronicity, where one person's life sort of parallels another person's life, although it doesn't seem, it's inexplicable as how this is designed or how this came to happen. And it really all revolves around the sun. And of course, and that's the sun, S-U-N. And of course, if you read, it's good that we talk about this too, because I don't mind getting into this at this point in time. If you read Royal Arch of Enoch, of course, there's a huge comparative religion study where I compare astrology and solar religions, Mithras, Apollo to Jesus, to the Bible story, which is, again, one of these solar allegories. It has nothing to do with Christ being a real person or not. The argument that Manly P, we talk about Manly P. Hall, one of the arguments he put forward was, well, when they were constructing at the Council of Nicaea, when the pagans at the Council of Nicaea were constructing the Christian religion, all they were doing was relying on the old sun worship, of Horus, Mithras, Apollo, and just transforming it into Christianity. And that seems to be the case. But with Elvis, it's these parallels with the sun. And because they're paralleling the sun, it's paralleling Jesus as well. I mean, so for example, we have, you have the birth of Jesus, which is, of course, 3 days after the winter solstice on December 25th. The sun being dead for 3 days, rises 1 degree north on December 25th. Hence, that's the birthday of the sun. This occurs under the house of Capricorn. So Jesus is born under the house of Capricorn. So is Elvis Presley. He's born in early January. So you have both Jesus and the birthday of the sun is occurring in the house of Capricorn. So you have that as well with Elvis. The house that rules that the sun rules over is, of course, August, which is the house of Leo. And of course, Elvis dies in the house of Leo. So that's another solar allegory. You will find throughout Elvis's career, his jumpsuits feature the Mayan solar calendar. You will find at the end of his career that he was introduced. If you've seen the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, the opening portion of that is called, the theme music is Also Sprach Zarathustra by Richard Strauss, and the opening segment of that, everybody knows it. It's the theme to 2001. That was Elvis's theme music when he came on stage at the end of his career. That is actually called Sunrise, of all things. And of course, where did Elvis produce his music? The Temple of the Sun Records in Memphis, Tennessee. And this ties into Memphis, Egypt, where there was a Temple of the Sun as well. And that's sat on the Nile River. And Memphis, in America, sits on the New World's Nile River, the Mississippi. So you will find, I call it in the book, I call it Jungian synchronicity. That's really the only way I can describe it, is these sort of parallels that go on between people that sort of occur in people's lives, that there's no explanation for it. Another one of these, and this is another one you just can't make sense of. You can wrap your head around it all day long. Elvis is one, and again, this is something I talked about in Cinema Symbolism. Something I talk about briefly in Cinema Symbolism too is Harry Houdini, the famed magician. And of course, a lot of people, again, this is just a head scratcher, that Harry Houdini, the famed magician, was born 26 years before the turn of the last century, 26 years before the turn of 1900, and died 26 years after the turn of the last century. He died in 1926, and of course, if you add 26 and 26, you get the number 52, which is a number of deck in a cards. And of course, that's the tool of the master magician, and of course, he's the greatest magician of all time. So you have these things in people's lives, this Jungian synchronicity going on. You can't really explain it. You can only accept it. But the life of Elvis being the solar allegory from start to finish. And again, getting back to that real quick, you have the whole idea of the sacred. You have the death of Elvis. Then you have the religious cult. With Memphis, Graceland being the pilgrimage to the holy site. To the grave, and of course you will find this in many religions. The pilgrimage to whether it be the Kaaba in Islam, or to the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, or Calvary, or the holy sacred journey, and then of course you have Christ surviving his own death. And then, of course, you have the same thing with Elvis. There are many rumors circulating that Elvis survived his own death. So yeah, I mean, you have these incredible parallels between the sort of Elvis quasi-religion, sun religion going on, and Christianity. It's really uncanny. And again, I think we talked about this in one of the last shows. I mean, in no way am I suggesting that Elvis was Jesus or anything like that. It's just an incredible, these solar parallels going on that are really inexplicable. You can't explain them. You can only accept them and just say, wow, it's really incredible. I chalk it up to it ties into this idea. Just real quick, I'm not really much. I mean, I get asked this all the time when I was doing these shows about these 9/11 images that come up in movies prior to the September 11th attack. And the ones that go back 30 or 40 years, I mean, I just write them off. That's coincidence. I mean, that's, I just don't buy into any of that. But when you do get closer to the event, you do find some of these. I mean, I've talked about it with the Matrix movies. One of the other ones that's really weird is the Patriot movie with Mel Gibson. But again, I talk about this I bring this up just in terms of synchronicity. It just seems to be something that happens, whether it's part of the life experience or just embedded in our subconscious minds, or it's just meant to be that way. I don't know. I can't answer that. But I mean, the parallels with Elvis and the sun. And, of course, the Jesus story is, of course, another solar allegory. I'll mention this. I'll end it up on this, Barbara, and you can just jump in. It's funny because one of the things I really like writing about is this comparative religion allegory, or study. I talk about it in the context of the Royal Arch of Enoch with the solar astrological allegories within Christianity and how they turn up in Freemasonry. And again, I talk about it in Cinema Symbolism with this whole thing with Elvis. I couldn't help myself. I just really, really couldn't help myself. And in Cinema Symbolism 2, the first chapter of it is, again, the solar astrological breakdown of religious movies. I break down the Passion of the Christ story and the Ten Commandments movies from a solar astrological standpoint. And I'll tell it here. It's actually, I really couldn't help myself. I hope this is not in bad taste. The chapter is actually called Solar Superstars. Where I break down the Jesus movies, the religious movies, the Christmas movies, and they all revolve around the sun also. And the celebration of Christmas, and then I break down the Ten Commandments movies. I was desperately trying to come up with a title for this chapter. I was calling it, religious movies or a study in religious movies. They're all boring, or astrological symbolism in movies or solar. I thought, this is just bland. I mean, and all of a sudden I was sitting there, and it was like a bolt of lightning hit me, and I thought of Jesus Christ Superstar, the musical.
Uh-huh.
I thought, oh yeah, of course, and I thought, well, let's just go with that. Let's just ride that and call this first chapter Solar Superstars. And that's how I open up. I hope it doesn't offend too many people. We'll find out. But that's actually the first chapter of Cinema Symbolism 2. It's called Solar Superstars, and it's a breakdown of the religious cinema of and I revisit a lot of this. Not revisit. I come up with I break down a lot of the symbolism of like the Virgin Mary and the Shroud of Turin and all that good stuff that you find in religious movies.
Do you think? I mean, while I am right with you on the fact that we are pre-programmed with these archetypes, that makes perfect sense to me. It's probably somewhere in our DNA. But do you feel that we are, as a species, reliving cycles. That
history repeats itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely, you could definitely say that. It is interesting. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people in history, whether they be, I remember, it was the guy who founded. Yeah, it does seem to be that way. I wonder sometimes if we're put on journeys that we're meant to go on. I feel sometimes I was meant to write these books. I don't know if that makes sense, but I feel like I was meant to do it. And 10 years ago, I may not have thought that way. Now I do. And I don't know why that is, but I feel like, whatever it is, I was meant to do this for whatever reason.
Does sound like you're slightly driven, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I was meant to do this. I know, that the guy, and this was part of his writings, I believe, the guy who actually founded the historical Illuminati. I'm not talking about a lot of the conspiracy stuff. I'm talking about like the, Adam Weishaupt.
Uh-huh.
He kind of talked about this. He thought that history moved in cycles. And I guess he kind of was tying into Nostradamus that, with these astrological ages and you went through cycles and that certain things were possible at certain cycles in history, where other times they may not have been possible. And, I think he was talking like, the French Revolution, and the American Revolution. These were only possible at these junctions in time. And, if you had tried them 5 years earlier, or if you had tried them 5 years later, it wouldn't have worked. And you find this, like what you call a modality. You find this in the simplest of things, whether it be a historical event or just minor things in life. The Royal Arch of Enoch would have failed if my book had come out in 1997. It would have failed. That book was only possible when it came out in 2012 with the internet and being able to do these radio shows. Same thing with the movie book. That book would not have made sense to anybody if that book had come out in 1995. I mean, it just would not have made sense. It was doable at that time, because that understanding was becoming more and more knowledgeable. If Cinema Symbolism or Royal Arch had come out at any other time, I don't think they would have garnered the attention that they have garnered, or been, as successful as they have been. Both books have been bestsellers on Amazon. On the Kindles at any rate, which, I'm very proud of. But I don't think, yeah, go ahead.
Are you familiar with the progression of the equinoxes?
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Now,
absolutely.
I mean, while there are the progression of the equinoxes on the Earth plane, there's also the cosmic progression. And once every 27,000 years, the two are in sync. And we're at one of those times right now.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think with, with the age of Pisces coming into the age of Aquarius coming in, I mean, I think that was the perfect timing for these two books, especially Royal Arch. I don't think Royal Arch of Enoch, or Cinema Symbolism, right? Or, I don't think, like I said, if these books had come out in the 1990s, I think they would have been ignored and probably have been fallen by the wayside. I don't think the timing was at all right. I think the timing was perfect when they came out. And, likewise with the re-release. And it's funny, too, because it was about a year ago, I was watching a TV show about this, about the same sort of thing we're talking about. And it was about the movie Star Wars, of all things. This was the very first one, that came out in 1977. They came out Memorial Day weekend. And they had on commentators. I mean, and they were heavy hitters. It wasn't just some fan, geek boy or something. And it was people like Walter Cronkite. This was made a couple of years ago, maybe, before they died. Dan Rather. I mean, very big, higher ups in media, talking about Star Wars. And the guy said it. He said Star Wars, George Lucas's Star Wars, the very first one. He said if that movie had came out in 1969, it would have flopped. He said it would have died. He said, you were at the height of the Vietnam War. He said 2001 had just come out. It would have been viewed as this kiddie movie. The country was very cynical at the time. He said it would have died. He said, and likewise, if the movie had come out in the 1980s, it would have been probably, campy. It probably would have been looked at as silly. He said, but that movie came out at the perfect time in history. He said Watergate was ending. He said the Vietnam War was over with. he said, and the country needed a pick-me-up. He said, and needed this space fantasy to go on. He said, and that's why that movie became the hit that it did, because the timing of that movie was perfect. He said it came out in the summer of '77. He said, and people needed that escape. He said if that movie had come out 5 or 6 or 7 years earlier, or 5 or 6 or 7 years later, it probably would have died. He said, and because of that movie coming out exactly when it did, it captured the imagination of not only the United States but of the world, and went on to become this mega hit. And I do agree with that. I think to an extent with my books, I don't think my books would have made any sense. In fact, I know they wouldn't have. I don't think those books would have been proper in the 1990s. I don't even think they would have been proper in the early to mid 2000s. I don't think that there was enough material out there on it. I think I think those books coming out was timed perfectly. I mean, I don't think I timed it perfectly. I think they're, like you said, it's what you want to call a cosmic force, the precession of the equinoxes, a changing over of one age to another. I mean, I don't dispute you in any way, shape, or form on that.
No, I totally agree with you. I think that the consciousness of all of humanity has expanded to a point where they will embrace this kind of material and apply it to themselves. They'll not say, "Oh, that's a bunch of crap." They'll say, "Look at that. Let's see if I can find it." And I really feel that your books are going to do really, really well because, given this information, you then go to a movie and you say, oh, I know where this is going. And it's like The Exorcist, the opening of the movie was that night before Halloween, and it was in Boston, and it was dark, and it was a dark, stormy night. And it tells you what's coming by just the setting. You don't have to see any symbols, though they're all there too. And it's just, it's amazing. And the more I think about it, the more I think if we can recognize these, then if we were to be an author and write something that we would subliminally put these symbols into places where they belong, because it's a message to people to interpret what you're meaning to do. So it's it's a language that is not spoken, but it is seen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the movie stuff, ultimately, for me at any rate, I mean, it's really, I like doing it. It's a fun study. Watching a movie and then being able to, break it down on a level. And, like I said, when I discovered that, when we talked about in the first hour, that little reference to the ballerina, I mean, that's really incredible to me. That like I said, the filmmakers will go to these lengths to put this stuff in. And it really is for me like a challenge to decode this stuff. And, like I said, I'll just, I know I see we're, running out of time here. I'll just, kind of wrap up on this. And, it talks about cinema symbolism too, was, one of the things in the book that I really think I think when you read it and when a person reads it, is really jumps off the pages is this comparative cinema study that I talk about alchemy being in the book, being a theme. One of the other studies is sort of what I call comparative cinema, where in cinema symbolism we talk about these movies drawing upon ancient religions and things like that, and these ancient symbols and archetypes. One of the things these movies do is also draw upon other movies, for this purpose. And nothing could be further. And I have to presume this was on purpose. If it is not on purpose, it's one of the greatest cases of the collective unconscious at work. And like I said, when people read the book, is this entire study of Crimson Peak and The Shining, because the parallels in these two movies is so uncanny. And once the book comes out, there's actually a unique story that accompanies this. That when I was watching Crimson Peak, I'll just get into it very briefly. When I was watching Crimson Peak, I knew that this movie was symbolic. I'd seen some interviews with some of the actors, and it's a very rich movie in symbolism. But going on beneath the there's really, Crimson Peak has 3 levels of symbolism going on. It's almost like the Wizard of Oz. You have this symbolic level, which is kind of on the surface, and then you have another symbolic level that really ties into the movie The Shining. And then you have another symbolic level, which is really complicated. It's hard for me to explain, but it has to do with whether this movie is sort of like a projection. It is really sort of like almost like a fantasy going on inside these people's minds. It's very hard to explain. But it's really one of the deep studies in cinema symbolism too. But when I'll just wrap up on this. When I was watching Crimson Peak, I was watching it really from I probably won't have time to get into it, but I'll just wrap up on this, Barbara. When you eventually get down to reading Cinema Symbolism 2, which hopefully will be very soon, I'm interested when you get to this. If you haven't seen the movie Crimson Peak, definitely check it out because there is. I guess that's what I'm trying to say is the Crimson Peak section is one of the portions of the book that I think is really one of the standout portions, and because there's just so much symbolism going on, I just can't wait to get other people's reaction on this.
No, it's on my list. I've written it down. It's one I'm going to go watch so that I at least have been through it one time, so that when I get the book, I have a frame of reference. Because
it's a good movie. It's a good movie anyway. It's a ghost story. It's not really that scary, but it's an entertaining movie. I liked it. And yeah, it's definitely one worth checking out. It's very rich in symbolism, though.
No, I'm looking forward to it. I have gone back and reread the first cinema symbolisms, and I think I have watched all the movies in it.
Right.
Sometimes after, sometimes before, but I found it fascinating in watching the movie. It gives you a greater depth of perception as to what is being shared.
Oh, yeah, I agree. Totally.
I mean, if you just want to be entertained, that's fine. Go ahead and do that. But to go to a deeper level with a lot of these movies, I mean, I've even watched The Wizard of Oz a couple times. I want to thank you. I didn't realize we were this close. Robert, thank you so much. We will get together again after 2 comes out.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for having me on. It was a great show.
My pleasure.